Hello, everyone. This is Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish podcast, Walking with Our Shadow, where we share ancient indigenous teachings of remembrance, all so we can walk and learn how to walk a path of radical self-love. Hello, everyone. It's Marita, one who catches lightning with the Path of Ish, here today with an opportunity to continue our discussion that we had last week, that we have almost every week in one form or another. And that is talking about relationships. And no, one might say that I'm a relationship coach. And you might say that's true in one way, but we're not talking just about human relationships. And we're talking about the importance of getting to know, of exploration, of discovery. Now that might sound more exciting for some. And so today we're going to explore in a very, ¿cómo se dice? Everyday use way of why building sacred relationships is important and the time that it takes. So we started having this discussion, my wife and myself, Rose. And so I said, why don't we just pop this on to the podcast? We have many discussions that we should probably podcast. And so I wanted to bring them in because this is something that has been on their mind and in their heart. It's something that we live with here in this household and in the circles that we lead. And that is a relationship to time. And the time that it takes to be able to truly make a connection, and why connections are important, especially in a world that is solution-oriented. And so I'm going to bring back Rose, who is a genius when it comes to really being able to look at systems, has a master's degree from Berkeley with social work. And one of the reasons that we have rich discussions is that they have such a compassionate and intelligent way of looking at the world, at people, at things around, non-human things, and really weaving everything together in a way that is holistic, one might say. So welcome back, Rose.
Thank you for having me.
So Rose, you started kind of this discussion, and let's just continue. So let's talk about the importance of time and why it's important to take the time, why no one talks about how long it really takes to, quote unquote, find quick solutions. And you had some great examples from your travels in Africa and travels elsewhere that we wanted to kind of bring to the table.
Yeah, since we were even having the conversation 5 minutes ago, I've just been thinking about how to approach this in a way that is useful and compassionate. So I like that you mentioned that because, it's easy to look at things and find the problems. And I'm very good at identifying problems, but that's also not a very holistic way of approaching things, because problems arise because of things. And so first, I just want to name that sometimes the reason that there is so much urgency, right? Why we try to speed up the process of building relationships with land, with other people, why things can sometimes end up being transactional in this way that sort of undermines the goal of the relationship. Is because survival is urgent. Survival is very urgent. We're very fragile. But I think it's also crossed into something else, right? Where consumption is also very urgent. And consumption is not always connected to survival, right? But sometimes it is. So we were just talking, just to kind of lay the foundation of the conversation we were having, about how nothing can replace time in a relationship. And relationships are foundational to spiritual work. They're foundational to, everything. It's funny that you mentioned people, oh, I'm not a relationship coach, right? Because I started out this current business as a relationship coach, but I was always like, that's not really, it's not in the way that other people would understand it, right?
Exactly.
I'm not a dating coach. I'm more like, change your relationship with yourself, change your relationship with everything around you. You're going to change your life. You're going to change how you relate to the world and how you interact with everything and be, and are a part of everything and see that you're a part of everything and see how it's all connected to each other, right? So that's not usually like the tagline for relationship coaches. You know what I mean? So I like that you said that, but it is really about the fact that in relationships, there is no replacement for time. There's no replacement for how long, in my experience, I could be wrong, but, whether that is relationship with a place and land, whether that's relationship with a community of people that you are, did not previously have a connection to, or, you're potentially an outsider culturally, geographically, whatever, whether that is with an individual, whether it's with parts of yourself and developing trust in yourself and your ability to care for yourself and love yourself and show yourself kindness. It really could be with anything. There is with an animal, I'm not sure if we talked about this on my last podcast, but it's coming up again for some reason. Like, even in the short term, if you go and sit somewhere for like 30 seconds, what are you going to see? If you go sit somewhere for 2 hours, what are you going to see? If you go sit somewhere every week for years, what are you going to understand? And what is that place going to understand back from you in that experience? Is very different. It's very different. So.
And, you bring up a kind of relationship that I don't think is taught in kind of Western culture, and that's a relationship of observation, right? When you're sitting and you're observing and you're connecting in that way, how important and how powerful that is. I find many times when I have even conversations with people who are like, oh, you're speaking my language. And I say, what language is that? And they're like, oh, I love being in nature. It gives so much back to me. And I say, okay, what do you mean by that? What is your relationship? And they're, people who love, and there's nothing wrong with this, of course, who love adventure and trekking and traveling around the world and going on hikes and doing, high risk things. And I say, oh, that's beautiful. How long are you in these places? And they say, oh, well, just for the trek, And I say, well, what did you learn? And they said, well, I won, or I conquered it. I did it. I said, but what did the land teach you? And they're like, well, I had to boulder this, or I had to do this. I'm like, but what did that teach you? Right? Oh, it taught me confidence. I'm confident in myself. I said, okay, so you go to the land to get confident about your ability to conquer it. What did you teach the land? And they're like, what are you talking about? I go, well, if the land taught you something, what did you teach the land? And they have nothing to say. So again, there's this idea that to be in a place, there has to be action, not observation. So I wanted to bring that because I think one of the things that we're kind of bringing to the circle today is that power of taking time. And time doesn't mean that it has to be action-oriented all the time.
That's really interesting. And I will just out myself. Like, I love all of those adventure sports. And Marita knows
There's nothing
that,
wrong
so
with that.
I am fully one of those people. But I also think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, because you were talking about observation. And a lot of the time when we ask people questions, they're trying to figure out, what are you trying? Like, it's like when you're trying to learn a professor, like in school, you're like, what's the answer that you want from me, right?
Exactly.
And people are so trained to describe a certain part of their experience.
This is really important, I think. Yeah.
Because guaranteed, there are probably ways that experience, they did learn something from the land, and they did take in something from that experience from a place, right? That was not just about the action, even though action is an incredibly powerful teacher. But they're not trained to, number one, potentially observe that. And number two, that is valuable to share.
The internal process is valuable to share. Yeah, I think is really important.
And the other thing that really stuck out about what you just said to me is like that, we tend to be taught that action is where we derive our value from, right? And so, and in many ways, action can also be a part of how we demonstrate commitment and relationship and, all of those things, right? But it's certainly not the only way. And so it's like, okay, so what are we really hearing when we hear people say those things? Is it that they aren't changed by land? Is it that they're not giving? Or is it that they just haven't learned that is something valuable to share or notice within themselves? I don't know. I'm sure for different people, the answer is different. But
I think it's also because you can't put that on a dating profile, right? Like, I sit and I observe this.
I'm trying to remember, like, when I was online dating, whether I would have been like, ooh, let's go on a date. You sit in nature and let it, like, soak into you, and you soak into nature. Would I have been like, you're full of shit. Like, that's a really nice thing to put on your profile, but let's be honest.
But that's, again, it brings up something so important that to tie it back to when you were talking about relationship coaching. We do not live in a society, where we're allowed that our internal experience and our personal experience is important because it's not sellable. I can't sell you me. It doesn't look exciting because I've been told that to be important and to stand out, I have to look like a superhero, right? Or I have to look like a certain character. And so we're not taught, as you said, to have that conversation and share that when people are asking questions.
Yeah, it's interesting, to be honest. So many different thoughts are rushing through my head around that because it's taking me in a different direction than I expected, which is actually, I've been thinking so much lately about how little words, I think, have come to mean a lot of the time. And I don't know if that has just escalated because so many people over the past 2.5 years have been spending a lot of time apart from other people physically. But I've been thinking so much about how, now if someone were to say, for example, describe what you were just describing, would they take it seriously? Would they think that you are, being truthful? Or would they think that those words are just like an attempt to signal something that does suggest value, that does suggest like virtue, sort of like a virtue signaling thing, right? Of like, oh, like I'm so good. Like I sit and take time with the land and like, and how hard it is to really know what that means. You know, as people say so much, especially in the online business world and like the spiritual development community, and what that actually looks like in practice. It could be worlds apart from person to person. And I don't know, it has me really curious about, even though we're talking about all these things like, oh, this doesn't, kind of equate to value or whatever. It really does depend what circles you kind of move in, because even talking about the things that we're talking about have become this shortcut for a lot of people to be seen. And again, here we are going back to, time, and that nothing can replace time. And sometimes the same is true when you're trying to understand, are you somebody who actually spends time with things? People can say whatever they want. People can say whatever they want, but you won't really know. And maybe you never will. I mean, this is a little bit how I lead, unfortunately. So there's always some uncertainty and like but there is nothing like seeing over time, how does somebody actually live their life? What are their relationships like? Do they take the time to see you? Do they take the time to see and be with and understand the things that they are engaging with and taking action on? I was thinking about the metaphor of a plastic surgeon. And, you walk into somebody's office. I don't know why you would just encounter a plastic surgeon, but I'm sure it happens. It happens in the television shows that we watch, so why not? How does it feel when that person's like, oh, hi, lovely to meet you. I could help you out with that thing you've got going on the side there. And you really want to address those wrinkles under your eyes before they get any worse. And you're like, oh, Jesus, like I just literally met you and you're already telling me how you want to like sculpt my body to improve it. You know nothing about my life. You know nothing about my values. You know nothing about my family. You know nothing about me or my desires. You don't even know.
It's an ideal that you sell, that has been selling.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking about how we approach land a lot of the time, right? When we move to become stewards of land a lot of the time. And there's tons of television shows about this, right? You want your perfect garden. You want your perfect landscape. And you just move in and you're like, this is what we envision. And the land is like, fuck, like
you
slow
Pinterested.
down. Buy me a drink first. Like you didn't even check to see like how I feel about that. You don't know what rocks are underneath, this dirt. You don't know where there's air pockets. You don't know what trees grow here. You don't know any of this. And you're here to sculpt me and you're here to change me and you just don't know me at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it brings it back to how we live in this very solution-oriented world where we are imposing our ideals on people, places, beings, and things without taking the time to really get to know. And so our solutions are actually very short-term. My father always said something. My father said many things. And he would say, I'm trying to think. I'm translating in my head. He said, you have to do something. If you take the time to do something well, you only have to do it once. Mm-hmm. If you are fast and try to speed through something, you'll have to do it over and over and over and over and over again, which is how many times Marita learns. And because I think also something to note there is also like the rush that you get of like solving something, like that internal rush, right? Oh, I solved it. I'm safe now. And you get endorphins. I mean, everything happens biologically in your body, but we're not, shown that time, even though I did grow up, in a commune with a farm, to take that extra time. And I think what I found jarring was, living in the multiple worlds that I did, you sometimes they don't translate. And I'm finding that I have the wherewithal, because I've taken the time to really knit everything together over the 40 plus years I've been in this body, of how to be completely me, and I become that translation of time, of value, of all of those things. But that has taken 40 plus years, right? And that has been an internal and outward journey. And it's not something that we look to as progress. If something takes you 40 years, why did it take you 40 years? You know, why didn't it take you 4 minutes? And I kind of want to bring it back to this, ¿cómo se dice? Example that I keep thinking about. And, you know, you were talking about land, and not everyone is stewards of land. And so, and another practical, I remember my time in the restaurant business, and I was always brought in to quote unquote fix things. Mm-hmm. And the way that I did so was I built relationships. Mm-hmm. You know, I didn't go in there imposing things. I got to learn a place and learn the people, to the point that sometimes I'd go in, even as a manager or something with a bigger title, and people thought I was a busboy because I worked alongside everyone and to get to know the place. Mm-hmm. And it was then when they saw that I took the time to not just ask them, but get to know how they operated. I asked them for advice, how to do their job, right? That then we were able to come up with solutions together. And I took that time, I would take weeks learning a place before changing anything. And we would change things together. And I think that it's not just, people talk, well, that's buy-in. And it's like, no, that's co-creation. Mm-hmm. You're co-creating something. And if you take the time, when you co-create something, it will last longer. Because a single creation, someone creating something out of their own, is only a part of the solution, or a part of the, como se dice, the quilt. I have one patch. I go around the world with one patch of quilt, and I have to find other people with other patches, and we put it together, and we sew it together, and we make a quilt together. And yet, I find that many times people are trying to make that one patch the whole quilt. I'm telling you, it's the whole quilt. And I'm like, no, it's just one patch. No, but it is, because they have so much writing, because they've been told that their intrinsic value is based on speed, on selling themselves. And they spend so much time selling themselves and trying to convince you that they don't even have a relationship with themselves.
Yeah. That's really interesting to end it on that note. It was definitely making me think of some of the examples that we talked about before getting on the recording about, when I was an intern in Ghana between my first and second year of grad school, and I was, learning and just interning at this Ghanaian, what they would call it, orphanage, but maybe in the United States, we would typically know as like a group home, like for foster children. And, I was told that I had to do like a project, like a special project, right, while I was there, which was only for a few months. Like, it was a pretty short period of time to come in as somebody who's an outsider. I'm sure they have tons of people come through like this because, it's a pattern, right? And also they had worked with this person before, so it's not like it was a totally brand new thing. But I'm pretty sure that I was the first American who had come through to be an intern at this particular group home, because it was Ghanaian run, and there was like very few of these nonprofits that were Ghanaian run. Most of them were like run by, foreigners, and yeah. And I was told I had to complete some type of project, not by the group home, but by, the person I was working with in Ghana, who was not Ghanaian, but their partner was Ghanaian. And I went in and I met with the, director. And they didn't have anything that they wanted me to work on, or they didn't have any ideas, or they kind of were like in that relationship building phase where it's like, do you not have any ideas? Do you not trust me to tell me your ideas? Is this like a cultural thing where you don't reveal them, right? Like there's many questions about why that unfolded the way it did. I can think of tons of answers why they wouldn't have just told me, even if they did. And, for one, like I had giant tattoos on my arms and they're already like, you're going to have to cover those up, which was not what they told the previous person. So there's a lot of unknown at the beginning of a relationship, especially when it's like, you're only going to be here for a few months. Like, why are we going to invest, effort in you? Do you really care? What is your agenda being here? Which I understand why. I mean, I can appreciate that would be the case. But I was told, oh, well, why don't you just do this by like the other person that I was working with who wasn't Ghanaian? You should just work on this particular project. You should, help them kind of create a program or some type of like strategies for kids who potentially have like developmental delays or things of this nature. And I was like, but they're not asking me for that. And I don't know if they want that. I don't know if they need that, right? And there was this like, well, I'll just, I'm sure it'll be helpful. Like just work on it, right? And so it's like coming into the experience, everything is emphasizing, take time, like build relationship, learn what it is people are really wanting for themselves, like listen to their guidance, listen to their expertise about their own experience and challenges and resources, right? Because that's the other thing. You might go in and have a brilliant solution, but potentially they don't have the resources to put it in place when you're gone. So why are they going to put all that effort in for 3 months and then...
And one of the resources is time.
Correct, right? Like the time to indulge your, Exactly. So, but I was just encouraged to do exactly the thing that I was told is not the way. Like, it's not the way that, we create solutions together that are meaningful and that are connected to that positive relationship building. They're not connected to just like the relationship aspect of creating quote unquote solutions or problem solving or shifting things or exploring. You can't just pull that part out and then have the rest function. It's not like, oh, well, they'll probably just get over the fact that the relationship aspect was shit because the solution I gave was amazing, right? You can't, those things are not like these separate, distinct parts of an experience or, they are inextricably intertwined. Mm-hmm. When I'm talking about diagnostics with people, for example, and this has been around for a while, I did not originate this. I'm not originating any of these ideas, just to be clear. Like, this is borrowed knowledge from many different sources. People talk about these 3 different types of challenges, which are technical challenges, right? And you could even say that every situation has all of these. Mm-hmm. Every situation where you're like, oh, we're coming in, we want this to work a slightly different way, then it's working. And everybody agrees it's not working, right? There's your first thing you want to make sure. Everybody agrees it's not working. Because if you're the only one who thinks it's a problem, already you got to work on that because that's going to be your first issue. But there's the technical challenge aspect of it, right? Which is like, okay, these kids, there was a child with cerebral palsy there. He had some developmental issues. There was a child who had a head injury at a very young age who had, cognitive stuff. And it's like, okay, the challenge is potentially they are not getting certain needs met because we don't know why. Is it because of a lack of resources? Is it because of a lack of knowledge? Is it because of whatever? Who knows? Not a shared value to prioritize that. I don't know. Who knows? And I still don't know the answer to that. I could make up things, but I truly don't know because I was only there for a couple months. That's the technical part of the challenge, we could say, if everybody agreed that this is a thing. The adaptive part of the challenge would be like, what is running underneath everything that no matter what technical solutions you throw at it is going to continue to be create a, a wrench in the gears or whatever. Although I hate using that metaphor, but because in some ways I'm constantly wanting to throw wrenches in the gears of things that
That's true.
function too well in ways that are harmful, right?
Yeah.
But let's just say, for the sake of argument, the adaptive challenge is like there aren't enough resources. No matter what problem you look at, there's not going to be enough resources to really support people to solve it. Okay. The relational challenge is the third part, which is like the part that a lot of people, and I've seen this come up with practitioners a lot, we forget sometimes how crucial the relational part of addressing something are. Because we're like, what's the problem? Like, we have this beautiful technical solution, or we went deep underneath and we saw the main thing that was driving everything so that the technical solutions were failing, right? Yeah, but you didn't take the time to see them. You didn't take the time to let them know, why should I trust you throwing all of this at me? Because there is this like, we receive differently when we have relationship, And so when I think about anything, these pieces are always there. They're always there, no matter what we're moving towards, what we're moving away from, what we're trying to address. And the relational one, we like to think we can skip over it or just like give it lip service, but people are savvy. People are savvy. Places are savvy. These types of ways of solving problems have been around for long enough that people are like, yeah. Like, you're going to come here, and I imagine Land saying a similar thing, but I could be wrong. But, it's like, yeah. You're going to come here.
Yeah.
You're going to throw all of your ideas at me. You're going to struggle with all the technical aspects and relational aspects of getting this done. Like example where we live, right? Relationship is a huge part of how you get technical solutions to problems. Huge. And then like after a few weeks, few months, few years, you're kind of going to peter out and you're going to move on. And we'll just be sitting here watching the process, laughing, potentially getting stressed because of how you, freaked out and tried to change a bunch of stuff and force everybody around you to make it work the way you wanted it to work. And then you're going to move on.
Yeah.
And that timeline is different for different people. It's different for different relationships, right? How long will it take? How long before they trust you? How do they need to be seen and understood? And that comes back to what we started with this topic on, which is like, sometimes no matter how well you help something or someone or some place or some relationship be seen, they will not trust you until you have taken the time to just be with them. In action or not in action, just to continue to show up. Nothing can replace that because, again, the cheapness of words, and even the cheapness of certain actions when actions are easy and actions, the only resource that really costs you is money, honestly. Because for some people, money's easy.
Yeah. You bring up a lot of things, as always. But the one thing that's kind of staying with me is, we keep using this word action, right? Action as a value. And, you know me, I like playing with words. It's, action is we're acting a part, I know this is kind of, whatever. Stay with me. But
if they've already stayed through this whole podcast, then they're still with us. We always take wandering paths.
But I find that when we are acting or when we are in action, many times we are playing that role. We are playing that role of a shortcut. Acting for many people is a shortcut because you are trying, it's like improv. You're trying to find the solution to something. And, we've talked about how with time we can lower the facade, lower the mask, right? Lower the acting, and where our action becomes just really a way of living. And we've talked about land, we've talked about culture, and I want to kind of delve in the last portion of this. Let's talk about relationship human to human. And the reason being is, as we're seeing, as we've always seen generations, be different. Let's talk about cross-generation, but let's also talk about how, so many people are changing and evolving with the pressure of what's happening in the world right now and how that's affecting one-on-one relationships. And one of the things I wanted to kind of bring is long-term relationships and how when you're able to spend time, whether it's family, friends, lovers, how that long-term, right, if you're able to keep that, allows you to change, grow, and evolve within it, and how it's not, because I feel that many times people look at long-term relationships as something that is static. I trust you to be this thing. I know you're laughing.
I'm like, have any of these people been in long-term relationships?
This is where a lot of people get angry.
Oof, this is like the death knell of a long-term relationship when you try to make it static. It's not going to survive that.
Yeah, but we do that also with like families, families and family roles, right? And during the holidays and everything like that, we expect people to play these certain roles, right? The uncle that drinks too much, the aunt that blah, like all those things. And there's so many memes and so many TikToks out there about it. But how we also in our relationship don't allow other people to grow beyond the act or the role that we've assigned to them or the role we've assigned to ourselves. So I wanted to bring that up.
Gosh, so many directions this podcast is taking right now. I'm wondering if it's going to be cohesive enough for people. Yeah. Gosh, I feel like you gave me something I need to think about for a minute. In an interesting way, it's bringing me back to something I said at the beginning of the podcast, which is survival. And in many ways, we are unconsciously taking shortcuts constantly, right? Potentially, depending on your brain, you may be taking more shortcuts or less. I mean, I'm not going to be an arbiter of that truth, but I've definitely read some information about that. But we take shortcuts constantly to survive, because actually the amount of things that we process, that we engage with every single day are so vast. So when we engage with things and we feel we can kind of, we can place them into a familiar spot, whether that is a tree, whether that is a person, whether that's a specific person, whether that's an animal, whether it's visually, relationally. There's so many different ways that we do this. it is actually very connected to like survival and the capacity that we have to process as though it is new every single thing in our lives, which we really don't have the time to do, like survival wise. And so our beautiful evolutionary process has allowed us to be like, you know, identify things in sort of a symbolic way that creates shortcuts so that every time we see a snake, we're not like, oh, look at this brand new, strange, squiggly thing. Like, you know, we are processing it because we have seen other snakes, or we have seen other snakes of that type that are poisonous or whatever, right? But I think as the world gets faster and faster, our attention spans get shorter and shorter. The amount that we're expected to do sort of gets more and more. The pace of things gets faster and faster. And I don't know that this is like conventionally true. I don't really care. I'm just going to be honest. Like, this is definitely an experience that I've had, and I've seen many people describe it this way. I can't help but feel like that's also puts additional pressure on relationships to be places where we take shortcuts. And I think this does apply to the person-to-person relationships that you were talking about, but honestly, I think it applies to all relationships. But it's also why having longer-term relationships that maybe have been given enough attention over time that they're not always the place where, you know, all the shortcuts are taken, where there is a process of like of ongoing evolution and change and intentional attention to that, are so powerful because there's so much to focus our attention on. You know, it's like we're always having to triage. Where are we going to take the shortcuts? Yeah. Because we're feeling the pressure of everything taking so much time. I mean, I have spent over the course of this year, I've had like a really astounding number of packages go missing this year. And the amount of time that I've spent on the phone to, you know, or on internet chat or whatever to like people that I've bought stuff from, and then UPS and then all this. And it's taken hours and hours and hours, like every single time. And then driving to different places to try to pick up these packages because there literally aren't bras on this entire island that fit me. Like, there's sort of this impossible amount of things that we're trying to fit into a finite amount of time. But the tricky thing is, so like, I think I'm saying all of that to have compassion for the fact that, you know, it's not always this like nefarious tendency that people just, you know, put people in pigeonholes, you know, or they don't build relationship. They just go online and get a 3-day certificate to say, I'm a shaman now. And like, they don't actually take any time to build relationships. It's not always like, you know, it's not necessarily this like, it's a thing that has us in its hands, in its grasp. And something is always going to be robbed from one place to give it to another. And so, you know, that's, I think, why, again, at the beginning, there's this tension between like survival and developing really powerful relationships, between survival and really taking time to be slow, right? My version of your dad's saying was work slow to work fast. That's what I was taught, right? And work fast is not like...
That's a shorter, faster way of saying it.
Classic, right? Perfect. Yeah, it was work slow to work fast because it's like, you know, you think you're going to save all this time, but what you're actually going to do is waste all the time.
And waste resources.
Time. Yeah. You know, I mean, is it really wasted? Whatever. We could argue about that. But you're not going
I'm just
to
thinking
get
packaging, you know?
Oh God. I mean, really though, like a lot of resources go into some of these things. And so when it comes to interpersonal relationships and taking the time to really be like, who is this person? Can I create the space for this person to be somebody different or be somebody new every time that I meet them, or over the years of time that I've known them? Of course they are changing. They're changing constantly. I don't like lack of change is antithetical to life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not life. It's like an unlife, and it's not death either.
Mm-hmm.
It's an unlife. It's an unliving. It's it's like unmaking, unexisting, right? But people are constantly having so much pressure put on from so many places. But there are times when we can exercise choice.
Yeah.
You know, and choose to slow down, choose to question. And I think that sometimes we just need the invitation or the pathway or just being shown that, oh, this is like something that I could do differently, because we haven't had the time to think about it, or we haven't been taught, or, you know, I was thinking about it yesterday about sometimes how, you know, the rhetoric of the left, even though I'm a total lefty in many ways, really falls short, because there's this like, well, how you don't have any excuse anymore. You don't have any excuse to not know certain things, to not be able to find certain things out. And I'm like, well, let's talk about that. These systems that we are caught up in are very invested in their own survival.
Yeah.
And so they will put a lot of pressure on people to be so concerned with their survival within a system that makes it hard to survive, because it's more about the system's survival than the people's survival within the system. The system is invested in making people preoccupied with their own survival.
It's like that Trevor Noah comedy show we were watching.
So, which part of it?
Where they were talking about during the pandemic, how everyone was talking about how the government was trying to control them by, you know, having people stay at home and, you know, opt in and stuff like that. And he was like, what do you think control looks like? People having free money, sitting at home, contemplating their life and their life choices, and
like,
having
existential, only 2 days versus,
you know, creating a system where there's never enough time. You know, you're going to the job to make the money, to buy the thing that you don't need, but someone tells you that you need, that you don't have enough. So you have to go back to like that cycle.
Yeah.
Right. That cycle. And so it's like, you know, when nature and the universe gives us a break to break that cycle, what do? Many times we ask for it, but we're really not ready for it.
Well, yes, of course. I think many times we're not ready for what we've asked for, because we have no idea what it's actually going to be like, or how it's going to come. But I think the reason that I keep coming back to the survival thing is because anytime I start feeling really righteous about a topic, and I'm like, let's talk about relationships and why they take time. And then and there's a little bit too much focus on like personal responsibility. I get really suspicious of myself, and I want to know, like, how can we have a better conversation about this? Because one of the things about personal responsibility and power over our actions that I think it's a very human-centric view. Mm-hmm. And it really assumes like a lack of agency, kind of bringing it back to some of the stuff that you talk about all the time, a lack of agency on the part of other kingdoms in the world, of other people, of, you know, other agendas, right? And there's so many stories. I mean, I was just teaching, you know, a class to your students the other day, and this kind of idea came up, right? We have such strong stories about why we make decisions as human beings. Why do we feel certain things? Why do we make decisions? Why we are who we are? That, you know, the more scientific discovery there is, but also within the knowledge of many indigenous peoples, you'll have completely different meaning making that really disrupts on like a very powerful way why we have the identities we do, what we are even made up of, what drives our behavior, what drives our emotions, right? How much is innate? How much is driven by like what minerals we have in our bodies, for example, right? And so I think this podcast and having this conversation as it relates to survival is bringing it back to this, like, this question of relationships is so important, and time, and like the fact that time can't be replaced in a relationship. And, you know, looking at it from less of a human centric perspective of like, oh, well, you just need to slow down. You know, you just need to take more time, which is really important too. I'm not saying it isn't, because it's really like, there will be gifts and experiences that arise from the slowness of a long relationship with anything, with a person, with, you know, that will not, they will not occur. You will never come close to touching them without that time investment. And why do we not take the time? Like, we are tiny little things caught up in a really, really big
Web
process and web that is driving us to not take the time, to not have the time to not even, to sort of be living beyond the limits of our compassion.
Wow.
You know?
That's powerful right there. Living beyond the limits of our compassion.
I mean, again, I'm not the first person to talk about this when it comes to living in a global community.
Yeah.
Right? And not global community made of humans and non-humans and everything, right? So I think particularly knowing that the people that listen to your podcast, you know, you have people that listen that are very sophisticated practitioners, thinkers, you know, questioners, who have been around the block and, you know, have experience and do have long-standing and deep relationships with the people that they work with, the communities they're part of or work with or have learned from, the environments that they are in, you know, and do so with a lot of intentionality as people that are going out into the world and that are teaching others how to be in relationship. If we also can't have compassion for the reasons that people might speed past that process or feel the urgency to, you know, buy a piece of property and come in and cut some new terraces, you know, in the first month, and then, you know, plop a bunch of trees there that aren't going to survive and aren't going to do, you know, aren't desired by the land or whatever, right? That there are things that are driving this that are less, that are not just this individual lack of value, that are connected to that bigger system and survival. And it doesn't negate the individual responsibility potentially, right? It's not so binary. It's not so either or.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rose, for taking the time to have this conversation. And again, this is, you know, a conversation that I know that you and I will probably have for a very long time, over and over, as it changes, grows, and evolves. And I think we have an opportunity here to, again, there's no solution in this podcast. We haven't come up with one definite solution, not even the solution of taking more time. And I want to leave it really open-ended that way. I know some people who like closure are going to be like, just tell me what I have to do.
Or they'll be like, this episode sucks.
Exactly.
You did not land that plane, Rose.
And we could wrap it up, you know, in a neat little package and summation, but we're going to leave that to you to wander with this conversation, to take the time to delve in, to pick this up, drop it, have all the reactions that you want to have, and pick it up again. I hope that one of the things I would love all of us to walk away, if you want, you don't have to, is really a holistic approach. Can we look at the bigger picture? Can we allow ourselves that bird's eye view? And when we go to different kingdoms to have these conversations, can we learn from them, right? In my circles, I would say, go sit with the tree, go sit with the rock people, go sit with the cloud people, go sit with the ocean and the beings, and have this discussion as well. Here are two humans having this discussion. Now go out and have this discussion with the different kingdoms and see what they have to say. See what they have to teach us. But for now, thank you so much, Rose. Thank you so much, listeners, for being on this path with us as we get to know each other, get to know ourselves, and as we walk this deep medicine path where there is truly no definite end, no point of arrival and solution other than being a being always in motion, evolution, and change. Shade. Once again, it is with deepest gratitude that I bow to you for joining me on this podcast, this episode, this circle, this plática, this meditation, this remembering. I hope that you have stayed curious. I hope to see you in the circle again next week. So make sure that you like or follow. Until then, may you be blessed with abundance of peace and radical self-love.